Our second keynote speaker today is Mike Prescott. Mike is a postdoctoral researcher at Laval University in Geomatics and works with Fraser University's Gerontology department. Mike has over 35 years of academic, professional, and lived experience in the areas of disability, mobility, accessibility, and inclusion in cities, parks, sports, recreation, and tourism. His current project, PARCOURS, seeks to inform accessibility standards in national parks. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Allison. On my first slide here, I have a picture of this idyllic park that has people and their dogs moving around, enjoying the scenery. And this is kind of one of the things that I think about when I think about parks. But what we just heard, I think, is a perfect preview to what I'm hoping to discuss here. So next slide. So here you can see a picture of myself in my manual wheelchair with the great dog Gabby the Burner, as well as logos for the universities and organizations that I'm involved with, including Accessibility Standards Canada, that helped to fund the project that I will be focusing on talking about today as it relates to parks. About me, I think Allison covered a lot of that. One of the things that I am just recently started was a position as the project manager for the Accessible Organizations Project, which is to help organizations in BC develop committees and accessibility plans based on the recent legislation here. So as a person, and I'd really like to thank Tilak and his team for inviting me to this opportunity, and to hopefully we're sharing knowledge and continuing to grow the accessibility movement. I think a lot of the things I might be talking about have already been said or will be said by many of the individuals that I've had the pleasure of working with in the past and hopefully working with in the future. So today, as I said, I'm here to discuss really the results of a study that was funded by Accessibility Standards Canada that focuses on informing national park standards. In particular, I want to introduce a model for strategically approaching the design and management of parks to serve all visitors, called the Journey Experience Mapping Model for Accessibility, or JEMMA. And I think, again, it's a nice extension of what was just talked about in the previous presentation. Next slide. So I think one of the things that is often, you start off with asking is, why do parks need to be accessible? And here we have a slide that has a picture of a group of older adults and some in wheelchairs listening to a park interpretation presentation. And I think this audience doesn't need to be sold on the idea that there's so many benefits, whether they're physical, social, health, or mental benefits for individuals, but also economic benefits for society. And in the end, it's really building on an equity principle. Next slide. So, how can we make parks enjoyable for everyone? And I think what was just said is not just about accessibility and inclusion. It's how am I actually going to get the enjoyment that I want out of a park? Because that's really why we go to parks. So the first thing that we needed to do is next. Back. This slide, I guess the builds don't work. Okay, so what we want to start with is being able to identify challenges. And then as we go through this learning process, map out these challenges to take into consideration what's important and what's difficult to implement. Again, this is through a learning process. You can start to identify challenges that you've prioritized. And I think that's one of the key things to consider, is that we may have this long list of these are the things that we need to do, but we really need to be able to prioritize this, because there are going to be challenges from those that are providing those environments and those services. And if we can guide them with, here's what we really think is important to start with, then we can get moving on our strategy more effectively. And this just feeds this loop of this learning loop, and based on the interaction that we have, the organizations have with the disability community, in particular, if the people with disabilities are members of those organizations. And today I'm trying to look at that through this lens that I call JEMMA, which builds on this idea of where we had study participants talk about exactly what I just said. You know, what's important to you? How do you sort of cluster those the challenges that you find moving around in parks, and how can we look at that through that prism? So what we found is that there's a preparation stage, a planning stage, and a enjoyment stage where you're actually visiting the park. Next. So in this slide, what you can see on the right is a web page for our study. And in this picture, there's research assistants asking me questions on a beach mat in Boundary Bay in Richmond, BC. So in our project, we are going with participants to a diversity of parks in the area around Vancouver with people with a wide variety of disabilities. And we take them through the parks, we film their interactions and asking them questions about, you know, what is it that they like about the park, what could be changed, and really trying to get an idea of, again, not only what works from an accessibility or inclusion component, but what's really important to them for enjoying it. And I often think of accessibility as similar to a game where you have a referee. If I don't, a good referee is somebody that you don't even notice during a game. A park experience is a great park experience is one where you don't actually notice the accessibility. So what we found from this research, the initial findings at least, is that there is definitely a complex and interdependent set of challenges that impact how the experience is of visiting a park. And again, there's environmental, there's social, there's temporal, information, which I think a lot of the speakers have already spoken about a lot, and personal factors. So we can't dismiss those. And this has sort of cumulatively led to this idea of this JEMMA model. Next. So in this model, what we have is at the top, we've got 3 boxes that are connected by arrows, and they're labeled prepare, plan, and enjoy. And our research found that there were these 3 clusters of activities that defined the journey experience. So going back to our previous presenter, it's kind of the idea of how do we understand that experience through the eyes of people with a wide range of disabilities, so that you can design and create and manage parks that are for everybody, not just even people with disabilities. So in step 1, the focus that was found was about, you know, am I even prepared to go to the park physically and mentally? Is my mobility device in a proper working order? And maybe what do I need to wear? In step 2, we're looking at, you know, what are my plans for actually getting to the park, and getting to the park, and what am I going to do once I'm there? So you need to know where you want to go, how I'm going to get there, what are the challenges that I'm going to face moving around the park and interacting with different features, and what are my expectations? Because that's often a critical element at the end, is did my experience meet what my expectations were? And, you know, things like information are great ways of setting those expectations. And in step 3 is, will I enjoy the visit? So what will the experience be like at the destination? What obstacles and hazards might I face? And ultimately, will I enjoy that visit? And we found that there were really these 4 clusters of environmental factors that affected each of these steps. And they were around, and they kind of relate. The way the boxes on the bottom are set up is that whatever is above them in terms of the process, so weather is right below prepare, obstacles and hazards are sort of more underneath the plan stage, and then infrastructure is more in the enjoyment stage. So they found that those environmental factors were more closely related to those stages. That's not to say that that those elements weren't throughout, but it was just a stronger relationship. Some of those conditions were things like weather, physical and social barriers, and when we talk about barriers, we're also thinking about, it's not just an obstacle that stops your ability to move forward, but it's also burden. So that's the cumulative effect of conditions that will, something like, the effort that you have to put in to get somewhere, or the amount of time it's taking. So it's not just sort of these point barriers. We have to think broader than that. And again, that's thinking along the lines of a journey. And then hazards as well, and infrastructure, the typical things that we think about with accessibility, slope and cross slope and widths and distances and such. But it's very complex. Next slide. And that didn't work out properly. Okay, so in this muddled slide, it shows sort of this Venn diagram of those, this ecosystem of factors. And again, it mirrors this idea of a journey. We were really interested in how these factors manifested themselves. So in terms of the context, it's, why are you going to the park? Example would be, camping versus a day picnic visit. So those two types of visits have very different expectations. As it relates to wayfinding, is it going to be difficult just to find my way around the park? Signage might help with that. Or is it going to be difficult? So wayfaring is really more about the physical experience. And then again, there's information and temporal factors like, one time of the year, the experience is going to be very different than another, or one time in my life is going to be very different than another time in my life. And this complexity is very difficult, obviously, for a park agency to take into consideration. And again, it goes back to being able to prioritize these things, understanding how they fit into sort of a network of challenges, and being able to see things as a seamless journey. And that ultimately is what we would hope to achieve. But it has this idea of having to worry about, okay, people are going there for different reasons, and how do we incorporate that? Next slide. So in our research, what we did was we used are called geonarratives. So here we have a picture of a map where there's what I talked about in terms of those interviews. We've now put them into a GIS, a geographic information system, and we're starting to be able to look at some of the patterns that we see. So I can, in this GIS, I can turn layers off and on to see if maybe there are people who are using wheeled mobility devices that are having different patterns in their experiences. And that, again, helps to inform park management or park agencies as to maybe you need to really consider rest areas at the end of long routes. I mean, that's an obvious one, but this hopefully, this approach that we're using, hopefully we'll be able to find some more of those complex type of relationships and inform national standards in a different way than just, yes, benches should be this high, or washroom widths and lengths and stuff like that need to be certain standards. But more importantly, what are best practices? And I think that we're, as we're going through this process, we're really trying to work with people with a wide range of disabilities to be able to find some of those key elements that need to be addressed, and help the parks focus on those priorities and move forward. I think some of the previous speakers talked about things like washrooms, the availability of accessible washrooms are critical. Where do you put them in the park? And this kind of approach hopefully guides those decisions to make really sound decisions that are not just knee-jerk reactions, and get incorporated into what you'll hear about in the future talks, things like park policies around how you design and manage parks. Next slide. So I'd like to thank everybody for listening, and if you have any questions, I'm happy to respond.
Thank you, Mike. I do apologize about some of the issues with your slides, so we'll definitely have those fixed in the post-production.
That's okay.
We did have some questions come in. So one was if you could give some more examples of the patterns your geonarrative research and spatial transcripts are uncovering.
Well, as I said, we're sort of early stages of collecting the data. I think one thing we found was, roots can be, again, my research is really more on the mobility area, so my focus is more on that. But as it relates to wayfinding in particular, we start to see where we have any path or trail that has more than one or two turns starts to really confuse people. And we found that we do a thing at the end of each, we do 3 routes, and at the end of each route, we ask them to point to the start of the route. And the errors in pointing to the right direction are quite large. So that pattern is more based on the sort of the windiness of those trails. And so what one of the things that suggested was to have something like mile markers or meter markers along a trail, so you can have that confidence that you're going in the right direction, and that you can kind of get an idea of how far away you are from your target. Because most people don't understand distances either, but you can start to get a better understanding that way based just even on that. So, and that's one type of pattern, but we're also seeing the beginnings of differences between groups. But I kind of focus on the shared experience. I think that's really where we can really help park agencies, especially at the beginning, is really focus on those shared experiences that we're finding in those patterns across disability groups.
Right, that's fantastic. Someone else is asking for maybe a few more examples about how and where parks will begin to implement some of these findings and these kind of practical solutions like those mile markers.
Well, as we do our research, we're in constant discussions with park agencies. In Quebec, we've developed a relationship where some of these suggestions are already in the process of being implemented. Again, our project was funded to inform national park standards, just like in Toronto. And so I think every 2.5 years, they sort of take into consideration what they've learned. I was on the accessibility standards outdoor committee in the past, so I know that that's how we hopefully will be incorporated. Even collaborating with Toronto, with UBC in Toronto, is another way that we're learning ways that we can move forward in that way. I also think it's not only informing national standards, but my interest is actually more of how is it going to inform like urban parks, where that's where you're more likely to actually interact. National parks, you have to have a car for almost all of them to get to, which is a major issue for people with disabilities. So if the accessibility standards thinks these things are going to trickle down, we hope to be, as the previous presenter said, proactively trying to do that. So we're in discussions with a lot of the groups, and I know with my new role as the project manager for the Accessible Organizations Project, it's going to be one of the things that I will embed into, have organizations think about embedding into their own accessibility strategy. So hopefully that will be ways that we can move those things forward.
Absolutely, yeah, really, really important work happening. I think we have time for one more. Someone's asking how you went about collecting the narratives. Was it primarily verbally or written through an app?
It was, we had RAs walk with the person with a disability around the park. And so they were videotaped, they were asked questions, that we had interpreters there for some groups. And it was just, as we wheeled through, we would ask questions, we would stop, look at things. You know, some of them there were questions, some of them were, a lot of it was just people would start talking about their experience. And the interesting things too were their experience as it related to other experiences, because most of the people hadn't been in these parks before. And so we were basically collecting even more data that could hopefully inform those standards. But the geo-narrative, I think, ultimately is, it's very novel approach that we're trying to employ, and it's going to be a learning experience even for us.
Absolutely, yeah. Fantastic, really exciting. I think that's kind of all we have time for. We have someone very interested in seeing a copy of JEMMA if as and when you guys are ready to share that work more widely.
Yeah.
So we'll collect the rest of these questions, because we do have a few more here that we don't have time for, and we'll flip those over to you. And if as and when you have time, we'll connect with you to have those answered on our Slack channel. Awesome. Thank you so much, Mike. It was an absolute pleasure getting to chat to you today.
Thank you.